Margaret Maggie Thompson was on her knees in the garden when the phone rang. At 61 years old, she had been retired from the army for 5 years. Her small house in Columbus, Georgia, sat just 30 miles from Fort Benning, where she had spent the last 15 years of her military career. She pulled off her gardening gloves and answered the phone, leaving a smudge of dirt on the screen. "Mrs. Thompson. This is General William Porter from Fort Benning." Maggie's chest tightened. She hadn't heard from anyone at Fort Benning since her forced retirement. "General. Maggie, we have a situation. I need your help." She almost laughed. "The army needs my help. That's interesting, considering how eager you all were to get rid of me. That was before I took command. I've read your file. All of it. Including the parts that were buried." Maggie walked to her kitchen and poured herself water. Her hands were steady, but her mind was racing. "What do you want?" 6 Apache helicopters are grounded. We've had teams from Boeing, Lockheed, Bell, everyone. Nobody can figure out what's wrong. 3 pilots have nearly crashed in the last 2 weeks. And you think I can fix them? Maggie, you're the best Apache mechanic the Army ever had. 28 years working on those birds. You wrote half the maintenance procedures we still use today. She looked out her window at the peaceful suburban street. I was also accused of stealing parts and forced to retire to avoid prosecution. Remember? Those charges were dropped after you left. After I was forced to leave, Maggie corrected. After my reputation was destroyed. After 30 years of service meant nothing. There was silence on the line. Then General Porter spoke again. "The person who accused you was Colonel Dennis Richards. He's now in federal prison for running a black market parts operation. He framed you to cover his tracks." Maggie's hand gripped the phone tighter. She had known she was innocent, but hearing it confirmed still hit hard. "We need you, Maggie." "I'm not ordering. I'm asking. These helicopters are supposed to deploy to Syria next week. If we can't fix them, soldiers on the ground won't have air support." Maggie thought about the young mechanics she had trained over the years. The pilots whose lives depended on properly maintained aircraft. The soldiers who needed those Apaches overhead. "I'll think about it," she said. "There's one more thing. The lead contractor trying to fix the Apaches is Brian Mitchell. Your former apprentice." Maggie closed her eyes. Brian. The young mechanic she had trained for 3 years, who had testified against her during the investigation. Who had taken her job after she left. "Brian's there. He specifically requested that we not contact you. Said you were too old and out of touch with modern systems." Anger flashed through Maggie. Brian had learned everything from her, then thrown her under the bus when Richards needed a witness. "I'll be there tomorrow morning," she said. "Thank you, Maggie. And I'm sorry. For what happened to you. The army failed you." After hanging up, Maggie walked to her bedroom closet. In the back, stored in plastic containers, were her uniforms. Her tool kit. Her certificates and medals. She pulled out a photograph, her maintenance crew from 2015, all standing in front of an Apache. She was in the center, the only woman, surrounded by 20 young mechanics she had trained. Brian Mitchell stood to her left, smiling. He had been like a son to her. She set the photo down and picked up her tool kit. The metal tools were still clean, still organized exactly as she liked them. Her hands knew every wrench, every gauge, every specialized instrument. That night, Maggie barely slept. She thought about the Apaches, about what could be wrong with them. In her dreams, she was back in the hangar, surrounded by the smell of hydraulic fluid and engine oil, the sound of turbines spinning up. The next morning, she dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a work shirt, and drove to Fort Benning. The guards at the gate looked at her skeptically until General Porter himself came to escort her in. "You look good, Maggie," he said. I look old, she replied. Experienced. There's a difference. They drove through the base, past buildings she knew like her own home. Young soldiers jogged by in formation. Helicopters flew overhead. Everything was the same, yet different. At Hangar 12, a crowd of contractors and mechanics stood around 3 Apaches. Maggie recognized the frustration in their body language. They had been at this for weeks. Brian Mitchell stood in the center, older now, heavier, wearing an expensive contractor polo shirt. When he saw Maggie, his face went pale. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. General Porter stepped forward. "I invited her. Margaret Thompson, meet the team that hasn't been able to fix our Apaches." One of the younger contractors laughed. "No offense, ma'am, but this is complex modern technology. It's not like the old days." Maggie walked past him to the nearest Apache. She ran her hand along the fuselage, then knelt to look at the landing gear. Something caught her eye, a small leak, barely visible. "When did the problem start?" she asked. 3 weeks ago, Brian said stiffly. "But I don't see why." "After the last software update." The contractors looked at each other. "How did you know about the software update?" Maggie stood up. "Because I can smell burnt electronics from here. You've got a feedback loop between the new flight control software and the hydraulic pressure sensors. Every time the computer tries to compensate for altitude changes, it's fighting the mechanical systems." The hangar fell silent. The contractors stared at Maggie, some with skepticism, others with surprise. Brian stepped forward, his face red. "That's impossible. We've checked all the software integration." "Did you check it under variable pressure conditions?" Maggie asked. "Did you simulate rapid altitude changes with full weapons load?" Brian's silence was her answer. General Porter cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thompson has full authority to investigate these aircraft. Anyone who has a problem with that can leave now." Nobody moved, but Maggie felt the tension. She was an outsider now, a civilian, and worse, she was the woman they had all heard stories about. The supposed thief who had been drummed out of the service. "I need to see the maintenance logs," Maggie said. "All of them. From the past 6 months." A young sergeant brought her a tablet with the digital records. Maggie scrolled through them, her experienced eyes catching patterns others had missed. She stopped at an entry from 4 months ago. "Who authorized this parts replacement?" she asked, showing the screen to Brian. He glanced at it nervously. "I did. Standard procedure. These aren't standard parts. They're aftermarket. Cheaper alternatives. They meet all specifications," Brian said defensively. Maggie looked at him steadily. "Do they? Or do they just meet specifications on paper?" She walked to the Apache and opened an access panel. Inside, where the hydraulic pressure sensors should be, were units with serial numbers she didn't recognize. She pulled one out and examined it closely. "These are counterfeit," she announced. The hangar erupted in voices. Brian was shouting that she didn't know what she was talking about. The contractors were arguing among themselves. General Porter called for quiet. "Explain," he ordered Maggie. She held up the sensor. "The real ones have micro-etching here. These are smooth. Someone's been installing fake parts." Brian's face had gone from red to white. "That's a serious accusation." "Yes, it is," Maggie said. "Just like the one you made against me 5 years ago." A young female mechanic, Sergeant Lisa Chen, raised her hand nervously. "Ma'am. I noticed those parts were different too. But when I mentioned it to Mr. Mitchell, he said I was mistaken." All eyes turned to Brian. "She doesn't know what she's talking about," Brian said quickly. "She's just a junior mechanic." Maggie walked over to Sergeant Chen. "How long have you been working on Apaches?" 3 years, ma'am. And you noticed the parts were different?" Chen nodded. The weight was off. Just a few ounces, but I could feel it. Maggie smiled. Good instincts. That's exactly the kind of detail a good mechanic notices. She turned to General Porter. I need access to the parts supply records. And I want to know where these sensors came from. You can't just come in here and take over, Brian protested. Actually, she can, General Porter said. I gave her full authority. Sergeant Chen, please assist Mrs. Thompson with whatever she needs. As Brian stormed out of the hangar, Chen approached Maggie hesitantly. Ma'am. Are you really Margaret Thompson? The one who developed the Thompson maintenance protocol? That was a long time ago, Maggie said. We still use it. It saved countless hours and probably hundreds of lives. I studied your work in technical school. Other young mechanics were listening now. They had all heard of Margaret Thompson, but most thought she was just a legend, or long gone. Maggie spent the rest of the day examining the Apaches with Chen's help. They found 16 counterfeit parts across the 6 grounded helicopters. Each one was slightly off specification, not enough to fail immediately, but enough to cause problems over time. That evening, General Porter found Maggie in the hangar, still working. You need to see this, he said, handing her a folder. Inside were financial records showing Brian Mitchell had been receiving payments from an overseas company. The same company that manufactured the counterfeit parts. He learned from Richards, Maggie said quietly. Saw how much money could be made selling real parts and replacing them with fakes. Richards is in prison, Porter reminded her. But his network isn't. Brian took it over. Porter sat down heavily. How deep does this go? Maggie looked at the Apaches. Every base that Brian's company has contracts with needs to check their aircraft. This could be nationwide. Can you fix our birds? With the right parts, yes. Give me 3 days. Porter stood to leave, then turned back. Maggie, I'm putting together a team to inspect every Apache in the inventory. I need someone to lead it. Someone who knows these aircraft inside and out. I'm retired, Maggie said. You could unretire. Full reinstatement. Back pay. Clear your record completely. Maggie looked at her dirty hands, stained with grease and hydraulic fluid. They were the hands of a mechanic, not a retiree. Let me fix these 6 first, she said. Then we'll talk. That night, Maggie worked alone in the hangar. The familiar sounds and smells brought back memories. Good ones, teaching young mechanics, solving impossible problems, keeping pilots safe. Bad ones, the accusations, the investigation, the day she was forced to turn in her uniform. Around midnight, Sergeant Chen appeared with coffee and sandwiches. You should go home, Maggie told her. With respect, ma'am, I want to learn. Mr. Mitchell never really taught us anything. He just gave orders. Maggie accepted the coffee gratefully. First lesson, never trust anyone who won't get their hands dirty. They worked together until dawn, Chen asking questions, Maggie explaining not just what to do but why. It reminded her of the old days, when she had a whole crew of eager young mechanics to train. The next morning, Fort Benning was buzzing with activity. FBI agents had arrived to investigate the counterfeit parts scandal. Brian Mitchell had disappeared, but his apartment and office were being searched. Maggie was reinstalling a genuine hydraulic sensor when a familiar voice spoke behind her. I should have known you'd be involved in this mess. She turned to see Colonel Dennis Richards' wife, Patricia, standing in the hangar doorway. The woman was dressed expensively, her face hard with anger. Patricia, Maggie said calmly. Your husband is in prison. Because of you. Because he was stealing and selling military equipment. Patricia stepped closer. He said you were the thief. That you set him up. Sergeant Chen moved protectively toward Maggie, but Maggie waved her back. Your husband framed me because I was getting too close to discovering his operation, Maggie said. I was tracking missing parts, asking questions. He needed me gone. Liar, Patricia spat. Dennis was a decorated officer. You were just a grease monkey who got above herself. General Porter appeared. Mrs. Richards, you need to leave this base. Now. As security escorted Patricia out, she shouted back, this isn't over. You destroyed our lives. Chen looked shaken. Ma'am, are you okay? Maggie returned to her work. I've been called worse by better people. But her hands were trembling slightly. The past 5 years of exile, of being branded a thief, hadn't been easy. Her husband had stood by her, but many friends had disappeared. Her reputation, built over 30 years, had been shattered in days. Ma'am, Chen said quietly, everyone here knows you were innocent. The younger mechanics, we all talked about it. The charges never made sense. You had access to millions in equipment for decades. Why would you suddenly start stealing? People believe what they want to believe, Maggie said. By afternoon, Maggie had identified the full scope of the problem. 23 counterfeit parts across 6 helicopters. But more concerning was what she found in the maintenance logs, patterns suggesting this had been going on for years, hidden in routine replacements. General Porter called a meeting in the conference room. The FBI lead investigator, Special Agent Karen Moore, was there along with several Army officials Maggie didn't recognize. Mrs. Thompson, what's your assessment? Porter asked. Maggie stood and displayed her findings on the screen. This isn't just about 6 helicopters. Based on these patterns, I estimate at least 40 Apaches across 5 bases have counterfeit parts. The room erupted in concerned voices. Every one of those aircraft is a potential crash waiting to happen, Maggie continued. The counterfeit parts work fine under normal conditions, but under combat stress, they'll fail. How did this go undetected for so long? Agent Moore asked. Because the person responsible knew exactly how to hide it, Maggie said, displaying Brian Mitchell's photo. He learned from Colonel Richards. He knew our inspection procedures, our testing protocols. He knew how to make everything look legitimate on paper. Where's Mitchell now? Porter asked. His phone was tracked to Atlanta Airport, Moore said. But he never boarded a flight. He's in the wind. A young lieutenant entered the room. General, urgent message. An Apache at Fort Campbell just had a hydraulic failure during training. The pilot managed to land, but barely. Porter looked at Maggie. One of the counterfeit parts. Almost certainly, she said. We need to ground every Apache until they can be inspected. That's 800 aircraft worldwide, an official protested. It would cripple our air support capabilities. Better than losing pilots, Maggie said firmly. Porter made the decision. Do it. Ground them all. Mrs. Thompson, I need you to put together an inspection protocol. Something that can be implemented immediately at every base. Maggie nodded. I'll need a team. Good mechanics who know what to look for. Sergeant Chen can help you select them, Porter said. Whatever you need. As the meeting broke up, Agent Moore approached Maggie. I've been reviewing the old case against you, she said. It's clear you were framed. Would you be willing to testify about what really happened? Will it help catch Brian? It might. He learned from Richards, but he also learned from you. We need to understand how he thinks. Maggie agreed. That evening, she sat with Agent Moore and went through everything, the missing parts she had first noticed 6 years ago, her investigation that had gotten too close to the truth, the sudden accusations against her, the evidence that had been fabricated. Brian testified against you, Moore noted. Said he saw you removing parts. I trained him for 3 years, Maggie said, the betrayal still fresh. He was talented but impatient. Always looking for shortcuts. I should have seen the signs. That he was corrupt? That he could be corrupted. Richards must have offered him money, a future position. Brian came from nothing. The temptation would have been strong. Chen knocked and entered. "Ma'am, we've assembled a team. 12 mechanics from different bases, all volunteers. They're ready to start training on your inspection protocol." Maggie stood. "Then let's get to work." Through the night, she trained the mechanics. She showed them the subtle differences between real and counterfeit parts, the telltale signs of tampering, the patterns to look for in maintenance logs. They were eager students, respectful and attentive. One of them, a staff sergeant named Williams, raised his hand. "Ma'am, I was at Fort Hood when you were accused. None of us believed it. You spent a whole week there training us, working 18-hour days. No one who cared that much about keeping soldiers safe would steal from them." Others nodded in agreement. Maggie felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in 5 years, the respect of fellow mechanics who understood the work, who valued competence over politics. 3 days into the inspection, the scope of the conspiracy became clear. 43 Apaches across 6 bases had counterfeit parts. $2 billion in defense contracts were involved. And Brian Mitchell wasn't working alone. Maggie was examining procurement records when she found it, a pattern of approvals, all signed by the same contracting officer. Lieutenant Colonel James Harper, stationed at the Pentagon. She immediately called Agent Moore. Within hours, Harper was in custody, and he was talking. "Mitchell approached me 2 years ago," Harper confessed. "Said he had inherited Richards' network. Suppliers in China who could provide parts at 1/10 of the cost. We'd bill the army for genuine parts, install counterfeits, and split the difference." "How many people were involved?" Moore asked. "At least a dozen. Mechanics, inspectors, contracting officers." Mitchell had learned from Richards' mistakes. He kept the network small, careful. General Porter called Maggie to his office. She found him standing at his window, looking out at the flight line where the grounded Apaches sat silent. "Harper gave us names," he said. 3 of them are mechanics you trained." Maggie felt like she'd been punched. "Who?" He handed her the list. She recognized all 3 names. Young mechanics she had mentored, taught, trusted. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I know this must be difficult." She sank into a chair. "I taught them better than this. Mitchell corrupted them. Offered them money they'd never see otherwise." "That's no excuse," Maggie said firmly. "A mechanic's first duty is to the pilots who trust their lives to our work." There was a knock at the door. Sergeant Chen entered, her face excited. "Ma'am, we found him. Mitchell. He's been hiding at a cabin in North Carolina. The FBI is moving in now." Within hours, Brian Mitchell was in custody. Maggie watched through the window as he was brought onto base in handcuffs. He looked older, defeated. When he saw her, he stopped. The FBI agents let them have a moment. "Why?" Maggie asked simply. Brian couldn't meet her eyes. "You wouldn't understand. Try me. You were always perfect. Never made mistakes. Never took shortcuts. Do you know how hard it was being trained by you? Nothing was ever good enough. I held you to high standards because lives depended on it. You held everyone to impossible standards," Brian said bitterly. "Richards offered me a way to make real money, to be somebody. All I had to do was say I saw you take some parts. And you destroyed my life. You destroyed mine first." Brian shouted. 30 years old and still just a mechanic, never good enough for promotion because I wasn't as perfect as Margaret Thompson. Maggie shook her head. "You were good enough. You just weren't patient enough. I was going to recommend you for Master Sergeant. I had already written the letter." Brian's face crumbled. "You, what? You were my best student, Brian." Impatient, yes, but talented. You would have made an excellent senior mechanic. Instead, you chose this. The FBI agents led him away, but his shocked expression stayed with Maggie. That afternoon, she was back in the hangar when General Porter arrived with several other generals and a woman in a business suit. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Secretary of the Army Patricia Williams." Maggie stood, surprised. The secretary extended her hand. "I've been following your work here. In 3 days, you've uncovered a conspiracy that could have cost lives and billions of dollars." "I had help," Maggie said, gesturing to Chen and the other mechanics. "Don't be modest," Secretary Williams said. "I've read your file. All of it. Including the commendations you earned over 30 years. The procedures you developed. The lives you saved." She pulled out an official document. "Effective immediately, you're reinstated to active duty with the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 5. Full back pay for the 5 years you were wrongfully separated. And a formal apology from the United States Army." Maggie's throat tightened. "Ma'am, I'm 61 years old. And you just did what contractors half your age couldn't do. The Army needs experience like yours." "What would my duties be?" General Porter spoke up. "Leading the new Apache Maintenance Integrity Division. You'd oversee all Apache maintenance, train inspectors, and ensure this never happens again." Maggie looked around the hangar. At Chen and the other young mechanics watching hopefully. At the Apaches that still needed fixing. At the work that still needed doing. "Can I pick my team?" she asked. "Anyone you want," Porter said. She looked at Chen. "You want to be part of this, Sergeant?" Chen's face lit up. "Yes, ma'am." Secretary Williams smiled. "There's one more thing." She handed Maggie another document. "The Bronze Star Medal. For your service in uncovering this conspiracy and protecting American soldiers." As the secretary pinned the medal on Maggie's work shirt, the hangar erupted in applause. The mechanics, the pilots who had gathered, even the FBI agents were clapping. Later, as Maggie stood alone looking at the repaired Apaches, she thought about the journey. 5 years of disgrace, ended by a phone call. The truth finally revealed. Justice finally served. But more importantly, she was back where she belonged, in a hangar, surrounded by aircraft that needed her expertise, working with mechanics who needed her knowledge. Her phone rang. It was her husband, Tom. "Saw the news," he said. "Brian Mitchell arrested. Conspiracy uncovered. And a certain mechanic I know reinstated with full honors." "It's been a long week," Maggie said. "Are you coming home?" She looked at the Apaches. "Not yet. I've got 6 helicopters to finish fixing. Then about 800 more to inspect." "I'm proud of you, Maggie. You never gave up." "I couldn't. Too many people depending on these birds being safe." 6 months later, Fort Benning looked different to Maggie. Not physically, the same hangars, same flight line, same Georgia heat. But the atmosphere had changed. The Apache Maintenance Integrity Division occupied a new building, with 24 inspectors trained personally by Maggie. She stood in her office, looking at the wall covered with photos. Her team at various bases, inspecting Apaches. Letters from pilots thanking her for finding problems before they became disasters. A framed copy of the new maintenance protocols, officially called the Thompson Standards. Sergeant Chen, now Staff Sergeant Chen, knocked and entered. "Chief, the ceremony's about to start." Maggie adjusted her uniform. After 35 years in service, she was finally retiring on her own terms. But first, there was one more duty to perform. They walked to Hangar 12, where 300 people had gathered. Mechanics, pilots, contractors, and officials from every base she had inspected. General Porter stood at the podium, and Secretary Williams sat in the front row. But Maggie's eyes went to another section, 15 young mechanics, fresh from technical school, here for advanced Apache maintenance training. Her last class. Porter spoke first. 6 months ago, this base had 6 broken Apaches and a hidden conspiracy that threatened our entire fleet. Today, thanks to Chief Warrant Officer Thompson, every Apache in our inventory has been inspected, repaired, and certified safe. Applause filled the hangar. But she did more than fix helicopters, Porter continued. She restored faith in our maintenance procedures. She trained a new generation of inspectors. And she showed us that integrity and expertise matter more than politics or profit. He called Maggie to the podium. She looked out at the crowd, seeing faces she recognized. Some of the contractors who had doubted her that first day. The FBI agents who had used her knowledge to build their case. And Brian Mitchell's victims, other mechanics who had been falsely accused or driven out when they asked too many questions. When I was forced to retire 5 years ago, Maggie began, I thought my story with the Army was over. I went home, planted a garden, tried to forget about Apaches and hydraulic systems and maintenance logs. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. But you can't forget 30 years of service. You can't forget the sound of rotors spinning up, or the smell of jet fuel, or the satisfaction of solving a problem that stumped everyone else. She paused, looking at Chen and her team. Brian Mitchell and Dennis Richards thought they were smart. They thought they could put profits over people, money over mission. They were wrong. Because for every corrupt contractor, there are 100 honest mechanics. For every shortcut taken, there are techs working overtime to do things right. The young mechanics in the audience stood straighter. To the new techs here for training, Maggie continued, remember this, your work isn't glamorous. Nobody makes movies about mechanics. But every pilot who takes off trusts their life to the maintenance you performed. Every soldier on the ground depends on that Apache arriving when called. Never forget that responsibility. She looked at a specific section of the crowd, 5 mechanics who had been reinstated after being wrongfully accused by Richards years ago. To those who were falsely accused, who lost careers and reputations to corruption and lies, your vindication is complete. Wear your uniforms with pride again. Then her eyes found Patricia Richards in the back, escorted by FBI agents. The woman had been subpoenaed to testify in her husband's expanded trial. And to those who thought they could silence the truth, Maggie said, her voice stronger, understand this, the truth always surfaces. It might take 5 years or 50, but eventually, someone will stand up and say, this is wrong. And when they do, all your lies, all your schemes, all your stolen money won't protect you. The hangar erupted in applause. People stood, clapping and cheering. Maggie saw tears on Chen's face, pride on Porter's, satisfaction on Agent Moore's. Secretary Williams approached the podium. Chief Thompson, before you retire, I have one more presentation. She pulled out a medal case. The Distinguished Service Medal. For exceptionally meritorious service in a duty of great responsibility. As the secretary pinned the medal on Maggie's uniform, she whispered, we failed you once. Never again. After the ceremony, Maggie walked through the hangar one last time. Mechanics approached her for photos, advice, or just to shake her hand. One young female mechanic, Private First Class Martinez, nervously asked a question. Chief, what do you do when someone says you don't belong? That women can't be good mechanics. Maggie smiled. You prove them wrong. Every day, with every proper inspection, every solved problem, every Apache that flies safely because of your work. You don't argue with ignorance, you defeat it with excellence. As the sun set, Maggie stood on the flight line with Tom, her husband, who had driven up for the ceremony. 6 Apaches flew overhead in formation, the same 6 she had fixed months ago, now heading for deployment. So it's really over? Tom asked. The investigation? The trials? Yes. Brian got 15 years. Richards got another 10 added to his sentence. Harper and the others got various terms. I meant your career. Maggie watched the Apaches disappear into the distance. The uniform comes off. But once a mechanic, always a mechanic. Chen has my phone number. If they really need me, I'll answer. A young pilot approached them. Captain Jessica Torres, one of the Apache pilots. Chief Thompson. I wanted to thank you. The Apache you fixed, I flew it in Syria last month. 90 hours of combat flight, no problems. Your work saved my life and my gunners. Maggie nodded. That's the job, Captain. Keep them flying, keep them safe. As Torres walked away, Chen appeared with a gift, a shadow box containing Maggie's patches, medals, and a piece of metal. What's this? Maggie asked, examining the metal. A hydraulic sensor from one of the Apaches you fixed. The counterfeit one. We thought you should have it. A reminder. Of what? That one person who refuses to give up can change everything. Later, as Maggie and Tom drove away from Fort Benning for the last time, she looked back at the base that had been her life for so long. Any regrets? Tom asked. No, Maggie said. I did my duty. I protected soldiers. I trained good mechanics. And in the end, the truth won. What now? Maggie smiled. Now. That garden isn't going to tend itself. And Martinez, that young mechanic, asked if I could mentor her. Maybe I'll start a training program for female mechanics. Unofficial, of course. Tom laughed. Of course. Because Margaret Thompson doesn't know how to really retire. As they drove through Columbus toward their small house, Maggie's phone buzzed. A text from Chen, first inspection team found 3 more counterfeit parts at Fort Bragg. Used your protocols. Crisis averted. Thank you for everything, Chief. Maggie smiled and put the phone away. The work would continue. Chen and her team would carry on the standards. Young mechanics would learn to put integrity over easy money, excellence over shortcuts. And somewhere, in hangars across the country and around the world, Apaches would fly safely because a 61-year-old mechanic had refused to let lies stand, refused to let corruption win, refused to abandon her duty even after the army had abandoned her. The sun set behind them as they headed home, painting the sky the color of turbine exhaust and possibility. Maggie had started this journey as a disgraced retiree pulling weeds in her garden. She was ending it as a decorated chief warrant officer who had saved lives, exposed corruption, and restored faith in the system. But most importantly, she was ending it on her own terms. With her reputation restored, her expertise validated, and her legacy secure. In her garden tomorrow, she would plant new seeds. But she would also keep her phone close. Because once a mechanic, always a mechanic. And if the call came again, a problem nobody else could solve, a mystery that demanded her expertise, she would answer. Some people were born to fly Apaches. Others were born to keep them flying. Margaret Thompson was born to make sure they never fell from the sky.